All right. Welcome to episode number 3 of the Amazing Autists podcast. Um, I drank pretty heavily last night, so I may have lost a few IQ points. Just a disclaimer. But yeah, in our last podcast and then in number 2, it cut off while we were recording. It cut off, so the end of the podcast is just it cutting off, and we didn't get the opportunity. We didn't get around to responding to comments from the previous video like we said we would. So we'll start this one by responding to the comments from the first video and then from the second video. So on the first video there was only one comment, and yeah, so it was someone called Full Metal American. They quoted us because one of us said in the first podcast, "I'm not a typical conservative," and they responded. They quoted that and said that's because you're a libertarian. And to some extent that's true, but it's also untrue to an extent. I would disagree with that. I don't think that the only reason I'm not a typical conservative is because of libertarianism. We both differ from traditional conservatives, when it comes to us being more libertarian in our values, but also, like we were saying in the first podcast, there's a heavily racial element to it. Like the left, basically, I would say in general, the left hates white people. Biden, who is who is possibly the next president of the United States, fully said he wants whites to become more and more of a minority. I would say the left is anti-white. Enough of the left is anti-white for me to completely side against them and be on the right. And I would say that might be more of a reason that I would side right than libertarian values. So it's largely racial, and that racial element doesn't have anything to do with libertarianism. So I would say, yeah, it's not just because we're libertarians that we're not typical conservatives. There's a racial element to. I'll just speak for myself at this point, but to my political leanings, it's a heavily racial element. I don't want to say the same for you, but I mean, you could respond. You could represent.
Yeah, I just think that today's climate, it seems like if you take any sort of view that's pro-white, like you're just labeled certain terms, and I don't know. It's like to not be able to acknowledge a fundamental part of reality, like race, is wrong.
Yeah, and
I mean, no matter how uncomfortable people might be, it's still a part of reality, and we have to deal with it.
yeah, and it's obviously more so on the left have these views, these heavily racial views, but even on the right, like even typical conservatives or just they're in society in general, just like the idea that racism is wrong, fucking anti-Semitism is wrong, xenophobia. Like we have these societally accepted uh, concepts that I don't particularly agree with. They're not substantiated. They're kind of incoherent. And I think that's like just the current racial situation to me is probably, I would say, the most important thing to me. I think it's and I'm not saying I can back that up completely from a logical point of view. I could probably put forth a pretty strong logical argument, but on a gut level, I would say like that is striking me as most important, and on a gut level, it's a huge part of my political positioning. Um, and people, I mean, the typical response is to mock that kind of thing, like to mock, oh, you're afraid of why are you afraid of brown people? Why are you afraid of white people becoming a minority? Just be a submissive homosexual, or don't care about these things. Like, but we'll see. We'll see how important it turns out to be in the future. We might not see it, but it's striking
The
me as
very least, like even if you're not like super, it's not even nationalism because it's more race based, but I mean, at the very least, you have to fight for the right to speak about these things. I think, right?
yeah,
Like even if you aren't like a pro-white advocate, just the ability to be able to openly speak about these things without being labeled at these disparaging terms and being put into these type of categories which you really aren't. Like that's an important what do you call it?
It's an important social norm to have
Yeah,
open,
exactly.
open, open speech, and
Exactly.
yeah, and legal too. Not yeah. There's the legal element, like infringing on the right to free speech, but then yeah, also just even if that isn't being completely infringed upon, there's just the social norm element, which does shut down discussion, and I mean, I would say that that kind of societal mechanism to shut down thought and dialogue is ultimately a bad thing and probably lead to bad things. Even if no one's having their freedom of speech completely infringed upon. But I think that is a threat also, like the freedom of speech violation. But anyway, I'm down to move on to the next comment unless you have anything more to say about that first one.
Um, Not really. Just that. Um, yeah, I mean, it makes sense to side with the right, even if you are like more libertarian leaning, let's say in general, because
Yeah,
it really does seem like the left is just out of control in many ways. It's like they do want to fundamentally engineer society to be something different than it is, and they've done it throughout history. Like there's just countless examples of it, and it always ends up in failure. It always ends up with mass amounts of people like straight up either dead or suffering or having their societies completely warped in a way
yeah,
where it's clear that the left is they're not going to stop. Like they have this vision of a utopia, and no matter how out of touch with reality is, and no matter how much you might fight back, it's like it always manifests itself in a different way. And
yeah,
I don't know. It's worthy of a fight to engage in dialogue and to try to do whatever you can
yeah,
to stop it.
yeah. A fight of wits, of course. Not a.
Yeah,
We're not advocating for violence. Just for the fucking YouTube moderators, however the fuck this shit works. Um. Okay. Yeah, I agree. There is. Yeah, definitely. I agree. Yeah. If you are a libertarian, it makes sense to side with the right, and but also there's a and yeah and then there's also the racial fucking element, the anti-white nature of the left, which overlaps with libertarianism. It overlaps with liberty. Like they do and they don't particularly want. I don't think they believe in free speech. They don't in certain countries like Canada, the U.S. Not the U.S. Canada, the U.K. and Australia. They don't have free speech, and the left, the anti-white left, directly wants to infringe on the liberty of white people. Like there's racial liberty infringement going on. So the racial element and the liberty element, they do overlap, but I would just say, yeah, in response to that comment, like we're on the right partially because of libertarianism, but even if I wasn't a libertarian at all, I think I would still side right just because the racial situation. So yeah, that was the first comment. Um,
yeah, it is more of a pragmatic thing than a principled approach. To be fair,
yeah. Well, I don't know. It's just I think it's not that it's not principled. It's just that having an in-group preference, like a racial in-group preference, or that kind of thing, is more of a subjective thing like that. Like it's more of like a instinctual thing. But you can no, you can make argument. You can make like arguments for it too. You can logically explain it. Oh
yeah, like how open borders, for example, wouldn't be the best thing to do at this exact time.
yeah, you could
Like you could logically explain to people that yeah, a lot of libertarians advocate for it, but here's why it would lead to the it wouldn't lead to a libertarian society in the end. Like you could rationally go through that process.
yeah, you could argue like people will say like oh having an in-group preference is illogical. It's like why should I value my own race over others? And it's like to logically explain to them that like you could look at the history of the world and it's all tribal conflict and yeah you may want tribal peace and that may be an ideal that you have but you have to realize that it's not one person's decision to have peace, right? If there are two different tribes it's not just up to one if they're gonna have peace or not, right? It's up to both. It's a mutual decision because one can just say, yeah, we want peace and we don't want to associate on tribal lines, but if the other tribe doesn't agree to that, then there's not going to be peace. It's a mutual decision, so people need to realize that. Like, it's not just up to you if you want. Like, that may be the ideal that people have, but you have to at least recognize that it's not just up to one party. It's a mutual agreement. Peace is a mutual agreement. So tribal peace
Yeah.
is a mutual agreement, and to not have the ability to associate on tribal lines, it's a dangerous position to be in, because if another tribe decides to do that, like, what are you gonna do about it? You're just gonna be fiercely fucking individualistic. You're gonna like you're that committed to it that you're gonna like allow another tribe to dominate you. Like, you're gonna die on that hill, like quite literally might die on that fucking, maybe not a hill, but that's people need to realize that that's the situation. But anyway, I'm down to go on to the next comment now, and just to reiterate the
I
setup
mean,
of this
I
podcast.
don't see a problem with like having a set of principles, but then acknowledging the reality of things. Like I think it's an okay approach to say that this is my idealistic version of things, but this is the reality, and
Yeah,
sort of. I
yeah,
mean, that's fine.
we can have an ideal libertarian society, and then just recognize that the pragmatic nature, like, we if we just like you were saying, if we were to just open the borders, it wouldn't, we could tell it wouldn't result in a more free society. we and we can have a pragmatic approach to these things. I would say that's a fundamental split in libertarians. Like, there's pragmatic libertarians and idealistic libertarians,
And
and
I'd also say that the reason why a lot of people are so dismissive of libertarianism is because of the fact that they associate it with pure idealism.
yeah, that's true.
And I mean, and I guess we're kind of saying that, yeah, we don't really agree with that either. It's a
Yeah,
silly way of looking at things.
we could make that.
It's not a serious way of looking at things in a way, in the perspective of someone who's non-libertarian, right?
Yeah,
It makes
this
it easier for them to dismiss your arguments.
exactly. They yeah. When I've seen people mock libertarianism, it's usually mocking this idealistic type of libertarian. So I'm down to, like, let's coin these terms right now. There's a split in libertarians. You can no longer all call us the same group and mock us all. There's two from now on. Let's coin these two different types. There's pragmatic libertarianism and idealistic libertarianism. The idealistic libertarians want to implement every libertarian policy immediately. Pragmatic libertarianism is, you have an ideal libertarian society, you recognize that it's an ideal way to function, but you're not necessarily in favor of immediately shifting to that. You recognize there are pragmatic obstacles. So that should be a fucking split. I mean, yeah, like you were saying, everyone always mocks the idealistic version of libertarianism, but that doesn't represent all libertarians. So fuck it. From now on, if you want to argue against libertarianism, you have to argue against both. And good luck arguing against pragmatic libertarians. Hell yeah. All right. Well, yeah, I'm down to get to the next comment. Now, just to reiterate the format of this podcast: anyone who comments anything, we will intellectually, we will respond to the comments in an honest fashion. Like, we're willing to cover any subject. That's what we want to do on this podcast. We're not like we're not trying to like portray ourselves as fucking like all knowing, but we genuinely believe in the merit of being honest about things. Like, that's how you get to fundamental reality. So we want to encourage honest dialogue, and we're committed to honestly responding to every single comment. Any topic, any user, we don't give a fuck. We'll respond to every single thing. Just to clarify, okay. So then that was the comment on the first video that we responded to, and then the second video got a few comments from one guy who, I mean, it was a bit of a comment exchange with one initial comment, and this guy's username is Cancel the Communist on YouTube, and so he said, I'm going to cut out a bit because he edited part of it and retracted part of what he said. So, but he said, 30 minutes in and you've spent about 90% of the time calling the left intellectually dishonest, which is cute since y'all deleted my comments off your last video. I told him that I didn't delete his comments and that it was YouTube automatically deleting them, so he retracted that part. But that's still in the comment, and he still called us intellectually. He said we spent 90% of the first 30 minutes of the second podcast calling the left intellectually dishonest, and then implying that we're intellectually dishonest. But he's somewhat retracted that um, we we are intellectually dishonest for deleting this comment. But anyway, we did not actually spend the 90% of the first 30 minutes calling the left intellectually dishonest. So that itself is an intellectually dishonest statement, and is a self ownage. Um, so, okay, then he's saying, then I guess he's providing further evidence for how we're apparently intellectually dishonest, because we're apparently we said that there were 1,000 votes only for Biden, which literally never happened, but that was reported, right? That is a thing that was reported. That was shown on that was shown to us, right? So you're saying it never happened, um, and that it was corrected within 10 minutes, but it still is a thing that happened. It still is something that showed up, and yeah, when we made that video, it was actually quite a while ago. Like we posted the video a bit after we recorded it, and yeah, we weren't aware of that, but regardless, it is still a thing that happened. It's sketchy. We never claimed to look into these things super thoroughly. I think what we were saying in that video is more that it seems fishy. There are things that seem fishy. We weren't claiming to have thoroughly researched whether or not there was voter fraud. We were saying on a gut level it seems fishy. That's a thing that happened. If you say they corrected it within 10 minutes, even still, I mean, it could be the case hypothetically that that it was a genuine attempt to add fraudulent votes that was maybe picked up on, and so they quickly corrected it and said it was an error, like as a way of covering the tracks and pretending it was an error. But you never know. There still might have been something fishy going on. So I don't think you have any claim here that we're being intellectually dishonest, which is what you're trying to do. Okay, and then there's basically one more comment. The other one, there's another one, but it's just clarifying about he thought we had deleted his comment in our first video, and it's just him. We were just talking about that. Then so the next comment is, you still spent most of this podcast's vacillating between calling leftists dumb, immoral, traitors, dishonest, and on, and your best example is a soccer player. And yeah, no, that's not. I don't think that's true. I mean, we did call them. Yeah, I'm sure. I don't remember exact words, but I'm sure. Yeah, we did call them dumb, immoral, traitors, dishonest. But I don't think the only example of that we gave is a soccer player, right? And also we weren't trying to. Like even in this podcast already, like we gave examples of how the left is intellectually dishonest, right? We didn't just outright say they're dishonest and then leave it at that. We did explain ourselves to some extent. We explained how they're dishonest about race, for example. And then yeah, our best example is a soccer player. Like I wasn't trying to substantiate everything we said about leftists when in that last podcast. That wasn't the point. We were talking openly. We're not trying to like provide evidence for every little thing we say. And so I wasn't particularly trying to provide examples. That soccer player was just something I saw the day before we did that podcast. So I don't see what kind of point you think you're making here. And then he goes on to say, it's okay to dislike the other side, but you're about as wrapped up in hating leftists as you swear they are wrapped up in dishonesty. Yeah, I do hate leftists. I would say that is correct. I am somewhat wrapped up in hating leftists. As much as they are wrapped up in dishonesty, maybe. I mean, so what? Is it wrong to hate leftists? Have you substantiated that it's wrong to hate leftists? Like that's not an argument. You're just kind of saying this with the implication being that it's wrong to hate leftists, but you haven't substantiated that. Why would it be a bad thing to spend my time hating leftists? Can you substantiate that it's wrong for us to hate leftists? I don't think you can, and it's not an argument here. Okay, then he says, you didn't really speak from your side as much as against the other. Okay, well, so what? We criticized the left. We didn't spend an equal amount of time presenting our views as we did criticizing the left. So what? That's the format that we have to stick to? We have to do 50-50? What are you talking about? Yeah, we criticize the left, but when you criticize the left, you're also representing your own side, right? You're saying there's a difference here. We're against this way of seeing things. So that is both criticizing the left, but it's also demonstrating our views at the same time. It's doing both. So it's kind of a useless sentence there. Then he says, calling a whole group traitors is pretty weak. And no, I don't think it is. Um, so when I use the term leftist, what I mean is a person who sides with the left, the currently, who would vote left in an election currently. And currently, if you vote left in the U.S. election, if you or yeah, let's just stick with the U.S. If you vote left in the U.S., you vote for Biden or Green Party, whatever. All these, maybe not fringe parties, but yeah, in general, the left. If you side with Biden, you're someone who votes left. I would say you're either a traitor to the U.S. or you're a direct enemy, and like you weren't loyal to it to begin with. Biden specifically and outright hates white people. He wants to make the founding stock of the U.S. a minority. He wants to make white people a minority. I would say if you want to do that, I think yeah, you're a traitor to the United States. I would say for sure, yeah. If you're on board with that, yeah, I consider you a traitor to the United States or a direct enemy. I don't think that's a dishonest or inaccurate statement to make. Fuck leftists. All right. So that's my response to this guy's comments. I don't know if you want to say anything more.
No, just that. Like you reiterated before, like a lot of times, it'd be great to just have a conversation going back and forth.
Yeah.
Like just to see what this YouTube user is going to respond to in response to this. I mean, yeah, it really could just evolve into just name calling, but whatever.
Yeah. We're open to whatever. Like, we're not thin-skinned. You can say whatever. We'll respond. And yeah, it kind of did. Maybe I was a little aggressive with my initial comments. Like he did. He actually apologized for blaming us for the for accusing us of deleting his comment after I clarified, and then I had already started typing up a next response, and then I ended up posting it before I saw his retraction. But at the same time, he did imply we were intellectually dishonest in the initial comment, and so I mean, yeah, I mean it is what it is. Yeah, feel free to fucking respond more. We're down to discuss whatever, and we don't have to stick to the like. It doesn't have to be in a hostile way. If you can say whatever you want, we'll respond. If you want to talk about anything else.
I think what you were implying is that based on what you know about leftists and how they have a tendency to be intellectually dishonest, that you wouldn't doubt that they'd try to pull off like voter fraud in some way in order for their side to win.
Yeah,
Because if they haven't shown that they're willing to be honorable in debates, I'm not sure about all of them, but it's definitely enough to the point where you think it's a trend, right?
yeah,
Like that you don't think that they'd be above like rigging an election in some way or doing something
yeah,
sneaky or underhanded.
yeah. I'm not gonna say exactly where, but or exactly how, but I have debated a lot of leftists. I've talked to a lot of like everyday leftists, and I've gauged their minds and their views. I've genuinely engaged with them and talked to them, and a staggering amount of them are very intellectually dishonest. They, for example, um, will be dishonest about the nature of race and racial differences, right? Like, and yes, they will actually be dishonest if like they will say the races are the same and there are no mental differences in general between races. Like that's an out. They'll make that actual claim. Like they, when I and even if you say like okay, but do you have evidence? And they'll of course won't have evidence because it's an inaccurate position. They'll still believe it, and yeah, they will make false claims about racial differences, for example, and different IQ levels. They have false beliefs, and they're yeah genuinely. I've noticed a pattern of them genuinely uh, being dishonest about things. They will consistently make accusations, like they consistently make accusations of Trump being racist, and I'll ask for evidence. Their evidence will be, oh, he called all Mexicans rapists. Like a staggering amount of them will say that. Like literally, they'll all say the same fucking words. I've genuinely talked to a lot of them, and a lot of them will say exactly what I said, that he called all Mexicans rapists, which he never did. That's one common example of them being dishonest. If you want examples, And then I'm just talking off the top of my head, so if I took the time to think about it and to find examples, I probably could. But just in general, yeah, my impression is that they're very intellectually dishonest people, and I don't see why I would expect them. Like they're dishonest in a like they'll call in terms of how they call everyone racist. They say people are white supremacists who aren't necessarily like they've demonstrated a certain level of politically influenced dishonesty, and so I don't see why I would expect that these very dishonest people would be willing to would be completely like constrained by honesty when it comes to the results of an election and counting votes or whatever.
Because I don't know. Okay, like I personally don't know the technicalities behind voter, like what certain instances could be. We're just speaking in terms of broadly assessing a group of people and noticing trends and seeing the way they are and the things they do and say, and we're just making judgments based on that. But as far as knowing like how the software that actually runs these elections, like what it actually entails, what it is, I don't know. Like personally, I don't even understand fully how like votes are processed. I don't understand how they're like what the actual process by verifying votes is, and
Yeah.
by making sure that people and making sure that people who aren't even alive aren't like somehow in the system, or I don't know. There's a bunch of examples. Like I get that there is like I don't know.
Well, I think like this guy's criticizing us. I guess like implying we're talking about gut reactions to like our gut kind of impression of leftists and us. We're kind of saying they would be likely to commit voter fraud. It seems likely, and I get how like from a an intellectual point of view you can say that's unsubstantiated, and yeah, it is to an extent. But just because it's unsubstantiated doesn't mean it's invalid, right? Like there's I would say it just seems improbable that they would be honest in other areas, right? If they're not honest about certain things, like test them for yourself. Go look at leftists yourself, the same people who are claiming to be honest about the election, and just see if you find levels of dishonesty in them. And you probably will. That's my experience. So just the point is we're dealing with people who are dishonest in many other areas, and I mean, I guess if someone doesn't see that, like, I don't know what someone's views would have to be to the point where they wouldn't see, where they wouldn't pick up that most leftists are dishonest. Like another example is they're dishonest about history, the nature of history, the nature of what makes like white countries more wealthy and have more things. Like a lot of them will outright say false things about history. Like they won't acknowledge that certain places were less advanced than Europe. They will. I've seen the argument made many times that like Europeans weren't any more advanced than the rest of the world. They were just more evil. They were just more. They just wanted to conquer more, like as if blacks in Africa and Native Americans had the option to conquer whites, but just chose not to. As if they were just more moral. And the big difference historically between whites and blacks in the when it comes to the era of colonization, the big difference was just whites being immoral. We were just more evil historically, which that's a dishonest representation of history. We weren't more evil. I mean, you could argue we were more evil just in the sense that we did actually carry out perhaps more conquest, but
Yeah, but Europeans were doing it to each other,
they were,
like
yeah.
to such a
The
ridiculous
thing is, yeah.
extent.
Hold on, let me, yeah. So the native tribes were also conquering each other. They were savage to each other. So the black tribes were savage to each other, brutally conquering each other, and they don't show. I would say they don't show any higher level of morality. Maybe in certain pockets, but so did Europeans in certain pockets. But yeah, I would say the Europeans weren't overall more immoral. That wasn't the fundamental difference between them. The fundamental difference was the capacity to carry out conquest. Europeans had more capacity to conquer than these tribes who demonstrated the same desire to conquer, but just didn't have the means to do it to the same extent. So you could argue they're more evil in the sense that we actually did carry out the conquest to a greater extent, but they still had the same desire to conquer, the same willingness to. They just didn't have the means to do it. They were less advanced in many areas. A lot of leftists will be very dishonest about that. Like, yeah, and just and I mean, we could point to plenty of other instances, like how,
Yeah, just because a group is disempowered doesn't make them virtuous by nature, by default.
yeah, exactly.
Like just because they're not on parallel with someone else.
Yeah, that's it. That's a big thing itself, right there. That topic, like, just
We were actually discussing before the podcast about the British Empire and yeah. Well, actually, okay, I wanted to talk specifically about the Spanish Empire and how they managed to conquer the Aztecs, because the Aztecs themselves were kind of splintered, and there was a
yeah,
group that was loyal to Montezuma and another one that really hated him, and he himself was just this bloodthirsty tyrant, right?
yeah,
You just
exactly.
full on just have huge human sacrifices, and just
Yeah,
goes on to show that, like, what if you put this person in a position of power where they could have potentially held more sway over like larger areas
of the
of
world.
geography. Like, what could they have done in terms of evil acts, right?
Yeah, what if Montezuma had the ships and it was capable of circumnavigating the globe and conquering
Right.
Europeans? Like he wouldn't have done it when the evidence is that he conquered off as much as he could. He's a horrible, horrible, tyrannical dictator, like horrible, who would do human sacrifices and torture people. And yeah, that's part of how empires spread. Like pretty much all the empires I can think of, they spread partially because the alternatives, like there were other evil, immoral tribes, right, that were threatening humans, right? So like if there weren't, then empires wouldn't be able to spread easily. Like if everyone if all the Aztecs or whatever were all getting along and they had a great society, it would have been harder for the Spanish to spread their empire into that region. But the reality is that there was a horrible, horrible, tyrannical leader. Montezuma was a horrible, bloodthirsty, deeply immoral person who was like terrorizing a huge section of people. And so when the Spanish came, they were perfect. A lot of the Aztecs were perfectly willing to side with them against Montezuma, and that's part of how empire spreads. It's the empire in many instances was seen as a better alternative to the other fucking hostile forces that were around certain groups
Yeah,
and
and we
people.
were talking about the British in terms of conquering India.
Yeah,
Like, the reason that they were able to hold India for as long as they did is because the Indians had experienced like terrible oppression under the Mughals. Um,
yeah,
and yeah, when the British came along, they were actually seen as a desirable, almost substitute, instead of having these terribly oppressive Mughals. You know, because the Mughals were, I think, predominantly Muslim. They were really treating the Hindus badly, and when the British came along, they had more of a tolerant view on things like religion and maintaining your own culture, right? And
yeah,
so that appealed to the Indians more, and they sided with the British. And
exactly.
yeah, so it's like in that instance, like, how could you say that the British were terribly oppressive and evil when the Indians like fully just sided with them?
Yeah,
Um,
and leftists, it's common amongst leftists to specifically say that whites were more evil, like we're more immoral. That's why we're ahead now. That's why we have better civilizations now. And it's dishonest. It's not the case. Like actually, the reason that the Brits stopped with colonies was because it was actually a net loss. They were losing money from it. It was hard. It was more convenient for them to let them go than to maintain them. And obviously, we had a higher level of civilization before the colonization in the first place, and that's why it was able to happen. There's a reason, like, the Europeans colonized these other places and not vice versa. They didn't have the means to do it. We already were more advanced in certain areas. And yeah, so that's one thing. The left will be dishonest about history if you get into it. Another example is when it comes to um, like when it comes to like the Great Replacement, right? They call the Great Replacement a conspiracy theory, right? When right wing people say it, it's called a conspiracy theory that there's an active push to change our demographics, and that it's important. And yet they'll fully say it themselves. They'll turn around and fully say it themselves. They'll be completely dishonest about what's happening. There's I mean I don't have the fucking sources right in front of me, but I've seen articles calling it a conspiracy theory, and then the same news, like I think it was the New York Times, the same news organization will also, like from a leftist point of view, talk about how demographic change is a good thing, and so they acknowledge it's happening, but they're intellectually dishonest about it when right wing people talk about it. They call us conspiracy theorists. They call us fucking afraid. Oh, we're fear-based politics. Like they're dishonest. I mean, this is just us thinking off the top of our heads. Like we didn't even look for evidence before this or anything. This is what we thought just off the top of our heads. If we really wanted to substantiate that they're dishonest, we could. I'm sure we could find a lot more shit. You can doubt that if you want, but I think it's pretty clear they are. Um, yeah, and then I don't know. We said we'd talk about empathy, so I guess we should just honor our word and fucking cover the subject of empathy because we said we would talk about it. Um, I don't know. I kind of did interrupt the natural flow of conversation, but I don't know. I guess we could cover empathy, analyze the concept of empathy, where society tends to treat empathy as if it's just a virtue. Just empathy is a virtue, period, and it's just pretty basic, inconsiderate worldview. Obviously, there's a downside to empathy, but in society, people kind of act like empathy is just kind of a universally good thing. It's good to be empathetic, as if you can never be too empathetic. And I would say that's kind of a philosophically unwise position. Like all these traits that we have within us, like empathy and obviously if there's if it's possible for humans to be empathetic, then it's also possible for us to not be empathetic. We have the capability of both, and I would say the fact that we do have the capability of both is evidence that they can both be good in certain conditions. They both helped to some degree evolutionarily. Neither one is universally appropriate or inappropriate. It's not universally appropriate to be empathetic, but we kind of live in this heavily emotional society where people don't tend to talk about the downside of empathy. And I think it's important to discuss because like your philosophy determines how you will act, and if you have weak spots in your philosophy that you act out in life, you will experience suffering. There will actually be problems. So I think it's important on a societal level for people to acknowledge the downside of empathy. It's something that I would say is not acknowledged enough. So I don't know. I guess we could, and like yeah, people. I don't know this shit. The way the social norms, the general fucking things that are considered virtuous in society, like empathy, like it's such a vague thing. Like I don't know how we're not getting more specific about these concepts. Like people just say like act like it's good to be empathetic, and then they leave it at that. But it's like, what exactly are they talking about? Even like we talked about, I think in the first podcast, like how a lot of words are kind of umbrella terms and they're not super specific. I guess in this podcast, like how we talked about libertarians, like there's different ideologies within the group that is libertarians. So when you say libertarians, like people can mean different things. They can mean the idealistic libertarians, or they can mean the pragmatic ones. Like, and these things should be clarified more. Like the purpose of language is to articulate things as accurately as possible, and so I would say it defeats the purpose of language to not do that and to not make these words more specific. So when people talk about empathy, like there's different types. There's different things that they can mean when they say that word, and we should clarify like what they are. Like when you empathize with someone, when people encourage people to be empathetic, what do they tend to mean? They tend to mean like, I mean there are good ways to be empathetic, but there's different things you can do. Like you can entertain like you could take some time to think about what another person is experiencing. that is empathize and empathize with them. Take some time to consider what another person, like imagine what another person is thinking or doing and how they feel. But then it's another thing to do that and then to actually feel their emotions and respect them, right? Like because not like and 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 there's kind of an overlap here. Like people say, "Oh, that's sympathy." When you actually feel their emotions, that's sympathy. But how could you possibly empathize with them? How could you be aware of them if you don't feel them yourself at all? I would say like that's kind of lacking in some of the definitions
Yeah,
of empathy
doesn't
that
it like
I've heard.
empathy seems to be a thing where it sort of has to be both parties sort of interacting in a sense. Like it can't just be one party. Um, what is it called? It's like it's almost like if you know pain, like you have to see it in another person and to know it yourself to be able to feel it, right?
Yeah,
So it's like you have to acknowledge that that person's going through pain. And you have to know what that is, and then you yourself have to feel that.
yeah,
So it's
and
almost like it's a thing where it's not just one party. Like, oh, I just feel empathy. It's like, but like, what if you don't
yeah,
know
like
what that emotion is like? Even like, how would you possibly know what you're empathizing? What if you're just wrong? Like, you have
yeah,
no
that's
idea what the other person's feeling actually.
well. Yeah, there's two things there that I want that. So yeah, for one, like if we want maximum empathy, like it has to be like kind of a mutual situation, right? If we're
I mean,
talking
it
about
and empathy doesn't even have to be like a negative emotion. I mean, even positive. Like
yeah,
when someone smiles, like humans are more likely to want to reciprocate another person's emotion if they're empathetic.
yeah,
Like
yeah,
they're like,
I would say yeah, you're onto. I'd say there's two different things. Yeah, two different things you made me think about when you said that. Like one is that there's if we're talking about having more empathy in society and increasing empathy to the maximum level, then yeah, it requires it to be taking it to be happening on multiple parts. And then yeah, there's the issue of empathy is obviously somewhat limited. Like how much can you actually understand another person? And
mhm.
certain people can understand things to a higher degree than others, and certain people can't be empathized with to the same degree. Like there's but people don't really get into this, right? They don't really think about empathy in any real depth. I would say, I
Right.
mean,
It's almost like a situation where it's like, well, I've
all right, so okay, if I don't know how that sounded to the listener, but our audio cut out and we had to uh, start again. So we were just talking about empathy. So we'll just continue with what we were saying. So I mean I'm down to we were talking about I think how certain people can empathize with some not all empathy is reciprocable. Is that a word? Like it's not. Some people don't have the ability to empathize. Some people it's it's easier to empathize with some things than other things. Like uh, not
like,
everyone
for
is just
example, I thought of a good example. Like if you're hungry, all of us know what hunger is like, right? So we can empathize with that. But
yeah
it's harder to empathize with somebody who's like trying to figure out like a question that some people don't even they
consider.
can't even fathom.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, I
So
would.
it's like that's and it's like so that to the person who can't even fathom the problem, how could they empathize with the person trying to solve a problem that they can't even like first of all configure in their heads the right way?
Exactly.
So
I would
so
say
it's like if you think that you're empathizing, you might actually be being delusional in a sense, and you're actually not empathizing. You're in fact kind of being arrogant about a situation, assuming that you know the
exactly.
intricate details of what someone's going through, and you yourself don't actually.
Yeah, like what do people mean exactly? They mean imagine the experience of another person, but then I mean, how should you treat your imagined experience of another person? What if you're inaccurately imagining it? Are they saying it's a good thing to go with these emotions and respect them and treat them as if they're valuable? I mean, is it all the time? Like it's very hard. You can't ever completely know what someone else is going through. So why would you treat um, your imagination of their experience to, as if it's super accurate or valuable? Sometimes it has limited value. But yeah, also it's like it's I would say we empathize based on it's kind of like a lowest common denominator thing. It's like we all have common denominators. Like if someone's happy, you know the base experience happiness. You can experience you can experience with the basic thing that is happiness. You without particularly knowing exactly why someone else is happy. It's kind of like a lowest common denominator thing. And I would say empathy is also a downward thing, and that's important to for people to realize. It's you can't you can't like empathize with something that's a lot more advanced than you, because if you could, then it wouldn't be more advanced. Like it's inherent to the nature of being more advanced than someone else that they can't fathom it. Otherwise, they would be just as advanced as you. Like you can't fathom the way, like I can't fathom Einstein's thoughts about physics. Um, he could maybe translate them in a way that is easier to understand, but I probably can't fathom what he's thinking. Maybe with some effort I might be able to, but like someone who's very advanced in a certain area,
Right, but
it's
you
hard to
might be able to
empathize with.
fathom the feeling that you get when you've like solved a complex problem, or you think you have, and so
Yeah,
you can kind of transcribe that emotion, right?
yeah, we can fathom with, it's kind of a lowest common denominator thing, where we can fathom with basic things, but it's not particularly advanced. And I would say it's kind of a one way street. Like it's the I think the main reason that empathy exists within humans is because of parental care, is to care for our offspring. Obviously, it helped us survive, and I would say in our species that's probably the main reason for empathy. It's so mothers take care of their kids, and in humans we have the longest adolescent period. We require quite a high level of empathy because we take so long to develop. Our parents need to care for their offspring for quite a long time.
Right,
So
because the alternative is a lack of empathy would just make you not want to take care of this like
yeah,
tiny human who's crying all the time and smells, and
yeah. So it would it
like if you didn't see it as cute, and if you didn't like connect with it on some sort of level, you wouldn't want to take care of it, right?
yeah. And so I would say that's its primary function in our species or in other species. It's like a and it's a in that situation it's a downward thing too, right? Like the baby can't really fathom what's going on with the mother to the same extent that the mother can fathom what's going on with the baby. It tends to be a downward experience. You can empathize with things that are beneath you, that because you can understand them. Beneath you in the sense that they're within your realm of understanding. You already have an understanding of it. It's not more advanced than you have been able to fathom. And like you could see and it's important to realize, like, so if there's someone who's if there's a more simplistic organism, it would be it would be easier for an advanced organism to empathize with them than vice versa, because we could like a human empathizing with a dog, we can empathize with a lot of what they go through. We can empathize with their basic emotions. We can recognize them, but and they
But the
can
dog can't empathize with the fact that you have to pay the bills to keep the electricity
exactly
going, right? Like it
exactly.
has no conception of that.
We're more advanced than them in that area, so they cannot empathize with it. Their empathy is limited, and there are some areas where like we can't empathize with a dog, and that's when it comes to like smell. Like they're experiencing a heightened smell experience. Their sense of smell is way more advanced than ours, and they smell things like from super far distances, and we can't fathom what's going on with them. We can't fathom their sense of smell. Like I mean, we can to the extent that we can imagine our own sense of smell, and then imagine what it might be like for it to be better. But we really we can't fathom how a dog's mind works in that sense. We can't fathom what's going on when they're smelling each other's genitals and stuff, or when they know when someone's a certain distance away just by a smell, or they know how to find their sense of direction based on smell. Like we can't fathom what that's actually like. It's beyond our understanding, so we can't entirely empathize with it. The only way that we can empathize with it is the lowest common denominator. We can empathize with oh, we can smell things sometimes, and then we know what it's like to um, realize something. Like we know what it's like to realize information and get pieces of information and have realization. So we can empathize with those two things and somewhat empathize with what a dog's going through, but not really. Like there's a limit, and empathy is somewhat of a downward phenomenon, where in which like more advanced organisms can empathize with less advanced organisms more so than the reverse.
But I mean, in your example, it's not even that an organism is inherently more superior. It's more that they have traits that are more advanced or more that function in a way that allows them to survive better, right?
Yeah,
Because it's not like it's just like a ladder and humans happen to be at the top. It's like we can't fathom what it's like to fly. Like a bird can fly. Most birds can fly, right? We like we won't know what that's like. We can imagine it, but
but we have more. Yeah, but we I mean we can fly in planes. Yeah, no, we don't know what it's like to fly fully. But I would say but we have more of a capacity to understand a bird than it does to understand us, because our just how advanced our brains are. Like they cannot. We can fathom what it's like for them to move through the sky by moving their arms or whatever, their wings.
mm-hmm.
We can do that more than they can empathize with us fucking paying the bills or whatever. Like with us thinking about this situation currently. I would say
So then when it comes to us imagining things, we might be better at that than like almost anything else on Earth,
yeah,
any other species.
I'd say yeah, we're more capable of understanding other species than they are of understanding us for the most part.
Is there a way to prove that though? Because it's really, I mean,
I mean, I guess there's like fungus and shit, and like we're just it's just so foreign from us that yeah, I mean, there might just be an inability for either of us to empathize with each other. But
but one of the key things about humans,
even still, I would say we're more easily we can empathize with fungus more than it can empathize with us. Like, are they? Is fungus aware that we exist? We're aware that it exists, and we're aware that it like has some fucking kind of photos. I don't know. I don't have no. I shouldn't have brought up fungus. I have no idea how fungus works, but I imagine there's some kind of nutrition. Like there's some kind of getting nutrients process that we can somewhat relate to because we also get nutrients that help us survive, and so we can relate to that extent. And meanwhile, the fungus probably doesn't really know we exist. It's not able to fathom that to the same extent. I'd say we can fathom fungus more than it can fathom us. As bizarre as that sounds. Yeah. So I mean,
I love how this podcast goes into that territory.
this is what I'm talking about. We're trying to get real and deep about these things, and it's off the top of our heads. So it might get bizarre. Who fucking knows? But we're just honestly trying to process these things and get real about them. Ask these types of questions. I would say in general, I think empathy is a downward thing. It's more advanced organisms are able to empathize with less advanced organisms more so than the reverse. And then there are differences mentally between humans. I mean, you can get into a racial level, but you don't necessarily even have to talk about race. Like certain humans may be smarter and have more ability to fathom things than others, and so they can therefore empathize with them more. And yeah, in certain, I don't know. I would say if we're being honest, I think that's what's going on. I think that's what's going on with white people. I think we're harder to empathize with, partially because we're more advanced in some areas than a lot of other races. If I'm being real, if I'm being honest, I think and I think that's what happens in general with kind of logical or intelligent people. They don't behave in a way that certain people can understand, so they are harder to empathize with to a lot of people. Like they don't. I mean, there's a norm, right? There's a distribution of intelligence levels within humans. And you can say there's different types of intelligence or whatever, but I would say our high level intelligent people don't think in the same way. Like that it's inevitable if someone's more intelligent than another person. They don't think in the same way. They must think and do things differently. Otherwise, they wouldn't be intelligent. They must.
I mean,
It's inherent to being more intelligent than someone else that they can't fathom it. They
I
cannot
mean, look at
fathom
the
your mind.
terminology.
If some
You're right. Like when we look at terminology, like when you call someone bright versus dull, you're making the claim that the bright person has more of something. The
yeah
dull
no and
person's lacking that, basically, right?
yeah, and it's inherent to being intelligent that you are beyond fathoming. Your thought process is beyond fathoming for certain people. If you're intelligent, it's inherent to being intelligent that you at least some aspect of your thought process is unfathomable for some people. Otherwise, you wouldn't be more intelligent than them. If they could completely fathom your thought process, then they would be just as intelligent as you. If they're just as capable of the same thoughts as you, then you're not more intelligent. So it's inherent to the idea that some people are more intelligent than others, that they're also unfathomable to others, and therefore harder to empathize with, at least in some way. And I'm not sure that's the case. Whereas if someone is unintelligent, you may be more able to completely empathize with them. Like they more of their personality, more of their mind, you can fathom and empathize with. So if
But they
we
can't. But it doesn't work the other way around, right?
exactly, I don't think it's
And it
not.
actually, I could see where this situation would cause a lot of friction too, right? Where it's like a person who's not as intelligent thinks that they're on the same level, and and so they act a certain way, right? Whereas the intelligent person can't see that the lesser intelligent person doesn't see things their way. Um,
It gets into some gray areas because yeah, if someone does see themselves as being empathetic and fathoming the other person, like if they can't accept that they can't fathom the other person, and
mhm.
they're really attached to this idea that they're being empathetic, then they have to either accept that they don't know certain shit and they can't fathom certain things and they don't exactly know what's going on. They have to either accept that, or they have to accept that they're uh, not particular, or sorry, I mean, well, they don't have to accept these things. They have to accept that they don't know certain things, and then therefore that they're not able to be empathetic in all situations. That they're this virtue they have of empathy, they're not super capable of it, and sometimes they can't do it. They have to either accept that and accept that maybe they're not as empathetic as they claim to be, or uh, or yeah, they have to accept that, or and that's a hard thing for some people. Like they have to give up their identity and their identification with their association with this supposed virtue and this identity of themselves as an empathetic person. They have to do that.
because ironically, they'd be less empathetic if they weren't willing to do that.
Yeah, exactly. So they either have to do that, or they have to make, or they have to pretend that they are empathetic, and therefore form false beliefs that
Like if you
and
are
make
truly
shit up.
empathetic, then you have to check yourself to see if you truly are empathetic, right? Which takes a certain level of intelligence for sure.
Yeah, I don't know. This whole empathy virtue is like there's multiple layers to it. Like we already said, there's the Aristotelian mean where it's obviously not universally good or universally bad. There can be too much empathy, there can be too little, and then people are just don't even get into like basic questions. Like when someone says to be empathetic, it's like, well, I mean, can you be empathetic with every human on Earth at the same time? Like, isn't there somewhat of a limit, right? You only have so much time in a day, so how much time in the day should we spend empathizing with others? Like, what exactly?
Right. It's
Like,
like where are you directing your empathy towards?
yeah, and if
It's
these
like are you direct like what if you're strategic about it, as cold as that might seem, where you're just like, I'm only showing empathy towards my family. Everyone else I don't have control over.
well,
So it's like my familial unit is the only one I'm showing empathy towards.
that's the thing.
Or at
Like,
least I'm investing my energy into that. You know what I mean?
yeah, well, that's the thing. There are these
Because I know a
questions.
lot of people have this idealistic view of empathy where it's just like you have to show equal levels for everybody. Like that's the right thing to do.
But
But
it's
I
like
don't know
you
if that's
can't
true
do
though.
that. You can't really do that. I
Yeah.
mean, you don't even know everybody. So obviously, the people in your
Right.
life you have to empathize with most the people that are within your consciousness. Like you for one, yeah. There's these questions about what's the best way to empathize. You can't empathize with everyone at the same time simultaneously. And if you do try to empathize with multiple people, then surely you're losing a certain type of specific thorough empathizing with individuals if you're trying to empathize with huge groups. So you're obviously compromising the nature of the empathizing in a certain way. So it's like, how many people do you empathize with? How much of your day do you spend empathizing? And who do you prioritize? When you're empathizing with one person, you're obviously not empathizing with another. So how do you choose who you empathize with?
Hmm.
And should you always do it? Like these
Like it's
people,
not just as simple as feeling
and
things
yeah,
and
and
just pretending that the feeling is the most
yeah,
important
and
thing.
why the fuck haven't these questions been brought up and asked and analyzed? If these people are so
I've never had a proper discourse on
well,
empathy. Like I
right,
don't
exactly.
recall
But
hearing or seeing anything.
these people are the ones out there saying be empathetic, but like how why aren't they talking about these questions? Why have if they're so invested in empathy and being empathetic, why haven't they answered these questions? They're pretty basic questions. Like why do we not do this? Why don't we do this? Why don't we do this in society? Why don't we get into these fucking areas? Like, why
Well,
not?
according to religion, it's you're supposed to show the most empathy towards those that are like suffering the most.
Yeah, true,
Like you're
for
supposed to
sure. That makes sense, of course. Yeah, I mean, but we should discuss these things and analyze them properly. Like, but society doesn't like doing that. Like, they don't like getting on this level with things for some reason. Like, I don't know, maybe because some people perceive this as being dumb when we're like, I don't know, we're speculating, we don't have the answers, and I think, some people like to go around acting like they have the answers, but then it prevents them from fucking openly talking about these things that they don't have the answers for, and they just don't do it. I don't know. I mean, it's like, why does it? I guess it kind of makes sense. Like, why doesn't a person ask? Why doesn't a kid ask questions in class? They don't want to look stupid, right? I guess
Mhm.
that's kind of what's going on a grand scale in society, and it makes sense. We can understand it to an extent, right? Like, it's the same thing. Like, the same reason that a kid doesn't want to ask questions and be genuinely honest with a teacher in school in a classroom full of their peers is probably the same reason that people aren't being intellectually honest in general in society. But it's a problem. I mean, it's impeding our ability to understand things. We're gonna have a lesser understanding if we don't actually do that. Just like the kid in class, if he's willing to be honest, he might get a better understanding. But yeah, I mean, I think it's a serious problem in
Yeah,
society.
because a lot of people I don't know, like our society does run on empathy to some extent. Would you agree that we need a certain level of understanding of each other to be able to function as a society, right?
This is the
And
thing. Like, I'm trying to fathom your question, and it's genuinely complicated and hard, and it's like vague, and it's like my current. I don't have like a concrete like answer, and then I guess that's the reason people don't get into this, because like you have to expose yourself as not like really concretely understanding the situation. I mean, how much empathy do we need? I don't know. These are hard questions to answer. They're not super simple, but people like to pretend they're
yeah,
simple, and that's I think it's the cause of a lot of problems in society. And this kind of honest discussions about things isn't common.
because I'm just thinking about it in terms of desire. Like you were talking about how empathy isn't discussed, and then I was thinking of the alternative. What do we discuss a lot about? And we discuss a lot about like what we want. And I guess on some subtle level, we understand that other people want that stuff as well. So it's almost like society is this constant friction between what we want and what we can get. And I don't know, like it's obvious that we need some level of empathy, or else like things wouldn't function the way they do now. It's like our society is insanely advanced, right?
Yeah,
And like I know, like intrinsically, that it does take a certain level of we keep using the word empathy, but like you were saying, like there's different types of things we're discussing here.
yeah,
We keep substituting it with the word empathy, but
exactly.
it's
It's
like
it's not a
in order
group.
for that construction worker to build that building and the retail person to sell what they do and the farmer to be able to farm what they do, it's like it does require something. Like it requires some emotional investment, right? The understand the
Yeah,
understanding, sorry, that I'm part of this big unit and that like I play a role and that
and
like
this
I'm trying to maximize my gain while minimizing other people's suffering usually
and these other
like
people
most
are
people,
similar to me, and that's how we all
yeah,
operate, because we all have like shared
exactly.
shared values and stuff. But then, what if there are people who aren't who are less similar? Like, what happens to them? Like, how do we have a societal mechanism in place for those people who are, like, let's say the people who are more advanced, like, who don't necessarily fit in with that and don't have the same values and don't necessarily think and feel the same way? What what happens then? I mean, I don't know. I
Yeah,
there's
it,
kind
it
of
it goes both ways. Like if someone's like an extreme in one end or the other, like yeah, what do we do with people like that for real?
Yeah, and I would say, I mean, yeah, if someone's very intelligent, I mean, it's harder for people to empathize with them. I would actually say, I'm going to go out on a limb here. I'm going to say that's what Christianity is about. Like, Jesus was like, that he's known as the truth. And I would say, whether intentionally or not, whether intentionally was Christianity was meant to have this meaning and be kind of metaphorical and have this purpose, I would say a large part of its function and deepest meaning is getting people to have to be familiar with accepting people they don't relate to who may be more intelligent or something. Like, it's society having this religion, like they're revolved around the familiarity with the idea that it can be tragic to kill certain unique individuals, which I would say applies to smart people, and like if that kind of familiarity with this kind of tragedy wasn't in a society, they may be less likely to be tolerant or to treat highly intelligent people well. I
Yeah, because if intelligent people are um special in a sense and you're not treating them well, it's like what incentive do they have to like want to share their gifts with the world and average people, right? If they're constantly being treated like shit, let's say,
Yeah,
it's like they're just not going to want to participate in society and we're losing something great. Like who knows how
or
much
they
we're
might
losing
or
by
they might get
like
genuinely
all the
oppressed.
great like art and scientific achievements we could.
Yeah, or they could just be genuinely killed off and like oppressed. Even like there's both the social dynamic between them. Even like let's say they don't get genuinely oppressed and killed or whatever. But yeah, if they're treated like shit, they're gonna change and they're gonna want to help people less. It's not gonna be beneficial. And then and then
But it's at the same time it's like I guess the art and science that they would be creating would be hard for the commoner to fathom, and they'd be less likely to even want to. Um, they'd be less likely to appreciate it.
yeah,
Like, I guess I don't know. No, but I think we've hit upon something like very real there.
yeah. Well, I think yeah. Well, part of how would you get a dumb person to empathize with a smart person? Hypothetically, you would have to encourage them to see the common denominators between the smart person and the dumb person. And I would say that is kind of what Christianity does. It kind of it expresses the common like it expresses what's wrong with oppressing intelligent people in a way that dumb people can relate to. I would say that might be the ultimate function of Christianity, possibly. Maybe not. I mean, I don't know. It's just it's just brain like out loud thinking here. But also, yeah, there's the
So you're saying that like something like forgiveness is just good in general, that we should just learn to forgive.
well, I'm not saying that.
Um,
That's a whole nother fucking concept. We could have a whole nother video on forgiveness. I would say I would take the Aristotelian mean still, like, right. But there is the I respect that mean. I mean, I think we both have come to the understanding, like, it's not universally good to forgive, it's not universally bad to forgive. Like, there's a balance. None of these kind of traits tend to be universally good or universally bad. If they
right,
were,
but I guess I'm just saying that like if you're working under the assumption that it's good to forgive, then I guess it's more likely that an average person would forgive a more intelligent person because they're more like sort of inseminated in the idea that forgiveness is good regardless of what a person is doing. So the average person is more likely to forgive like just anyone who's acting in an extreme way, which could include really bright people, right?
yeah,
It's almost like a way of inoculating and protecting like the people who are
yeah,
more different, but not necessarily in a bad way either.
yeah, a certain level of forgiveness, yeah, definitely it could encourage. I mean, there could be a downside and a good side. Yeah, it could encourage, it, like, yeah, more tolerance towards intelligent people, but it might also encourage in more forgiveness for people who it might not be good to forgive.
Yeah, that's
So,
also true.
but the fact is, like, if that is what's going on, then I mean, people need to be wary of that, and maybe if I don't know, maybe it's a good thing to be wary of that in the first place. But yeah, and then there's I don't know, there's a whole we can get real into this, like we talked about, like there's the fucking fact that if you're gonna empathize with someone else, like, what's the best, like, if you genuinely want to help someone, I mean, sometimes people are in fucking difficult situations. Let's say your mom is struggling financially and you want to help her, but like you don't have a job or anything, and you don't really have the ability to help her. Like, what should you do? Like, should you sit around thinking about her feelings? It's like, no, sometimes the best way to help someone else is to focus on your own success and, like, spend your time looking out for yourself to make sure you're in a good position, because you can't really help people if you're not in a good position yourself. And then you can apply that to, like, countries. Like, is like we can't help the rest of the world. We can't solve, like, world hunger if our country itself is not in a strong position. So there's that fucking element to it. And then there's also the reality of, like, I would say empathy is like it's common for in a survival situation, like, people's empathy will shut off to some extent. Like that, when do people do things that we would consider unempathetic? It's when it's like a desperate survival situation.
Hmm.
So empathy to some extent I would say is the product of comfort, because like we were saying, we do have to prioritize our own survival to an extent, and if our survival is under threat, then it makes less sense for us to be able to empathize with others. So we should think about that when it comes to whether or not we should be empathetic. And like if we're mixing populations from all over the world, like for one, there might be genetic differences in populations. Like let's just put that out there. There might be genetic differences in the levels of empathy in different races. Why would there not be? Like why would we believe that there aren't differences? Like that's not substantiated. So for one, there might be differences. Let's leave that out there. There might be genetic differences in the capacity for empathy. Why would we just assume that there aren't? For one, doesn't make any sense. And then even not even and then in addition to that, when we're bringing in people from vastly different parts of the world, like maybe from places where they actually were in a genuine survival position, they might they might have like their they might have less empathy. They might be less adapted to have empathy. The biological reality of their upbringing
Wasn't
might,
that what people literally accuse white people of? Being less empathetic, being like more cold and
yeah,
um but like
yeah.
we don't
It's usually
like is there
dumb
truth to
people.
that, or is that like actually stereotyping and that's wrong?
I would say I don't know. I mean, I don't know. It's hard to judge it. Like as a race overall, are we more empathetic or less empathetic? I mean, I would say that a lot of the time, people it's definitely a very common phenomenon where like people on the left, for example, will accuse people on the right, and we know the racial makeup of these groups. You know, non-white people are way more likely to be on the left, and the majority of the people on the right tend to be white. And then there will be like different positions, right? Like we're somewhat libertarian, so when it comes to welfare, for example, we're not against having programs where everyone pools money together to help disenfranchised people in society. We're not entirely against that, but we recognize that taxation violates the liberty principle, and we would prefer for those welfare programs to be funded voluntarily. Ideally, they would be funded voluntarily. So we have that view on welfare. And then what tends to happen is that leftists don't have that view. They're in favor of the state power, and they will consider us unempathetic for our position. So there definitely is a phenomenon of non-white people accusing white people of being empathetic when in reality they just can't fathom our minds. And so I would say, yeah, I don't know. That's probably where most of the no, I don't know. White people might even are probably more empathetic. I mean, than other races. Not even are we not less empathetic. I think we're probably more empathetic when you look at like how many white people are like willing to give their countries away to foreigners. I mean, I think I think like we were saying, our societies don't talk about the negative side of empathy that often. Like we overvalue empathy. I think we live in quite empathetic societies. Like we have all the refugees welcome shit. Like people are quite empathetic.
Yeah, it's like you're talking about like people on the right and how they would rather people try to make like a living instead of relying on other people, which is in your best interest, really. And it's like that could be construed as being like non-empathetic, right?
Yeah,
Um,
and then yeah, but then there's certain types of empathizing.
but it's almost like but it's kind of like life kind of is just harsh. Like life itself it doesn't seem to be very empathetic if you want to humanize things.
Yeah,
It's like terrible shit happens all the time that's out of our control. So it's like if you are somebody who's experienced terrible shit, like you kind of get over that state where it's just like, well, I have to act all sweet and nice to people. Like life is just isn't like that, and we know that people on the right tend to be older people as well, right?
yeah,
And they've
and
experienced the ups and downs of life, and it's just like for someone to on the left to claim that the people on the right are less empathetic, like how do we know that those people just aren't as experienced?
yeah, and
Because
and who exactly is more empathetic, right? Like with the refugee crisis and all the like hysterical white women who are saying let them in, encouraging refugees, saying refugees welcome, when these refugees are trying to, well, not so much anymore, but they were trying to get into Europe on fucking shitty rafts and they were dying in the sea. Like they encouraged this shit. They said refugees welcome, and they but like let's say hypothetically that if we bring in all these refugees, like society will collapse and it'll end up with a poor quality of life for everyone. If the hysterical white woman saying refugees welcome didn't consider that possibility, and hypothetically, let's say it's the reality, are they really empathetic? Like
Yeah.
if they're truly empathetic, shouldn't they think things through a little bit? And then I don't like.
Right.
So who's really more or less empathetic? Someone who's willing to think these things through, like in an actual deep and honest way, or someone who doesn't really put much thought into it and just acts on feelings? Like,
It's kind of like the stereotype of, like the mom who just kind of is really like sweet and like caring,
yeah,
and the dad who's just super stern and disciplinarian.
yeah,
And it's like it's easy to point to the dad and just say that he's clearly lacking empathy. But it's like, how do you know that the mom herself has like thought things through and has experienced this stuff on the same level as the father figure?
yeah. That really is what's going on. That really is
No,
a
because like
microcosm.
it is a common like a thing in
Yeah,
people's lives, right?
yeah, and maybe we just talked about the possible metaphorical nature of Christianity, and like most religions they refer to God as the Father too. So there might be some important relationship with the Father that is that is needed, or with the archetype. Like you have to respect that like stern masculine presence, and it helps.
Yeah, and like actually respected, because
Yeah,
we know that that masculine presence can actually be oppressive, right? We know it can actually manifest itself in negative ways. But it seems like as a society nowadays, it's like we're only focusing on the negative.
yeah,
It's like we've really like bemoaned the position of fatherhood to the point where it really is just a shadow of itself. It's like dad's really, I don't know.
yeah. No, I mean, I'd say it's just there's a real lack of like respect for logic. I don't know where it comes from. Maybe it's just because like our society is like it's so easy to live that people can get away with like having shit minds, right? Where they're just not, they don't really think anything through. They never had to actually do something that required like serious like planning and thought, and so they're not aware that it's important. Like they've been able to do things their whole life without ever doing that, and then so they either have to they can either they have the choice between just fucking staying how they are and being shit at doing things and and not realizing it, or they if they are to realize that if they are to realize that certain things take real effort and thought, then they have to recognize that they're lacking seriously as people. And I feel like that's too much for people to take. They're not willing to entertain that, and it never gets brought out. It never gets exposed because we're not in difficult situations.
But do you think part of empathy though is communication? Like it's really important. Like if you are a parent, it is really important to actually talk to your kid and really get to know them, and not just like believe that okay, like I know exactly what's going on.
Yeah,
Like it's
exactly.
important to like establish some sort of,
Well, yeah, that's the whole thing with empathy, right?
it is important to reach out to people and actually understand them as an individual, even if they are young and like inexperienced. Like you still want to form a bond and like get to know them and understand like where they're coming from, right?
Yeah, well,
Like because people do want to feel like they're being heard, right?
that's the thing. Like when people, a lot of the time when people empathize, they're imagining someone else's experience, but like, are they imagining it? Imagine, but a lot of time when they do that, they're kind of imagining something positive, but it's not reality. So is that really empathetic, or like, not really, right? If you're imagining a false reality and then having feelings associated with a false reality, is that surely that's not good? It can be good to an extent though, because at the same time you can I don't know, it's complicated. You can imagine a hypothetical situation. Like if you see someone acting a certain way, you can imagine a hypothetical situation in which they're acting this way for good reasons and they're not actually a piece of shit, and they're just in some certain situation. Like if you see someone fucking angry, fucking yelling on the street or some shit, and you can you can empathize. You can imagine a hypothetical situation that, oh well, maybe they're angry for this reason that, and they've had this struggle I can relate to, and they're not actually a horrible person.
Yeah, it's
So,
like, isn't that showing like a more mature, like empathetic approach rather than being like, oh, this person's angry. They must be deficient in some way.
but at the
And
same time,
therefore,
yeah,
because
well,
I
there,
see that a lot. I noticed that like it's a trend. It's like where it's like with anger, it's like it's only acceptable by certain people at certain times, and otherwise, it's like it's a sign that you're out of control. It's
yeah,
like,
that's
is
a
that really
whole,
being
well,
empathetic, or is that just picking
whole,
and choosing?
that's a whole other topic on
Yeah,
how anger is seen, which is another thing that can be covered. Like, there's no, obviously, still apply the Aristotelian mean. Like, it's another thing that's overly demonized. I agree, but it's obviously, if anger was universally wrong, it would be weeded out of our species through evolution. Obviously, it wasn't universally wrong. It had some benefit. Same with empathy, but same with not being empathetic, and same with not being angry. Like,
yeah. It's like, and the people who assume that you always just have to like be pleasant. It's like I don't agree with that. Like I don't know if you feel the same way, but there's definitely like a certain stratum of the population where it's like if you're not like constantly okay, like you're
yeah,
deeply
no, that's
flawed.
no for sure. Like,
It's like
yeah, that
emotions like anger and sadness and jealousy, like they obviously have a purpose. And the actual empathetic approach is to understand that person, not to just put on a front and just pretend that, oh, they're not feeling well, so that means that
but
they're,
at the same time, like, you don't, you, so it's good. It can be good to imagine hypothetical. You could hypothetically imagine what someone might be going through, and then have some like semblance of forgiveness based on that. But at the same time, you don't want to be overly committed to what you're imagining, because what if it could also be inaccurate? So you don't want to be over.
right.
You don't want to overly believe it, but at the same time, it can be beneficial. And so I think the best approach would be a dogmatic approach, and I think adhering to the truth is an overarching thing that is good, and it applies to that too. Like, empathy is good and bad. Empathy is bad when it results in someone not adhering to the truth.
Right, because it's like if someone's like, let's say sad, and they're like, and they're a really respected figure, you might be like, you might you might have a tendency to think that they're sad because they must be dealing with a high level problem, um, and and maybe like they're finding it difficult to find a solution versus like a sad homeless man. You just assume that they're sad because
Because of
they
their
don't
own
even like
fault.
have any material possessions, right?
That's the
But it's
thing too.
like
Yeah.
you're making like a judgment based on their like social position, right?
Well, that is what people do. People do choose certain people to be empathetic with, and people to not be
Yeah.
empathetic with. And if you're doing that, and that's clearly happening with the left and black people. They're anytime there's a black criminal, they'll completely imagine a situation in which they're not, in which they're actually righteous or they've been oppressed or something. And then anytime there's a white person, they're not willing to do that at all. They'll just imagine that he's some shitty, evil white supremacist, and that's evident by the fact that we were talking about this earlier, that leftists are less able to fathom the political positions of right wing people than the reverse. And Jonathan Haidt studied this, and there's a study on it. The left was less able to replicate um, someone on the right's views than the right was able to replicate the left's views, and that which is ironic because it's the left that tends to think they're the empathetic ones, but clearly they're
Well, that's
not.
part of the reason why Trump won in 2016 because he like the left was constantly touting this: you're a racist, you're a bigot, like, and they have that as like a platform.
No, they're awful. They're
With
awful.
regards to white people, whereas
Exactly.
Trump was just saying, okay, I'm thoroughly against that as a platform. Not only that, but like I'm going to bring back the jobs that a lot of people lost.
Yeah, exactly.
And
They're not empathetic at
so
all. They say that's the thing. They say
like
these things.
and they don't have the inner like ability to reflect on that and say, whoa, what did we do wrong? Did we do something wrong, or are we flawless? And it must have been like some conspiracy to make us lose the election.
Yeah, the norm on the left, I would say, is not empathizing with white people and empathizing more with non-white people than with white people. It's fully racist against white people. I guess they can argue that, oh, like what you said earlier. I mean, like how it kind of makes sense to empathize with people who are suffering more, and that's how they would justify it. But at the end of the day, there might be consequences with that, right? Like, let's use the example. Let's go back to the example of the homeless person. How much do you want to empathize with them? Is it helpful to just empathize with them completely, or at some point do you want to Like, what if you are what if you are actually trying to understand their worldview and you realize that they have a flaw in their worldview? Um, how you, should you be tolerant of that flaw and like try to see where they're coming from to the point where you don't correct it, or like shouldn't you correct it? Isn't it at some point the most empathetic, the best, the most helpful thing to do to cut empathy off at a certain point where you recognize they're doing something wrong? Don't entertain that worldview. Tell them they're wrong and have a better understanding and something they need to fucking hear. Tell them something they need to hear. Like give them a alternative view that will help them.
Yeah. Because it's like if you've tried to be compassionate and you've tried to be understanding and you've done all these things and they still have the same viewpoints, it's like at that point you're just wasting your time, right?
Yeah. But anyway, fuck the left. They're not empathetic. They're against white people, and I would say, yeah, they may. I guess it is somewhat the case that non-whites are suffering more on Earth, but you know, there might be reasons for that that aren't just like oppression that can't necessarily be fixed how the left wants to fix them. And again, like there's only so much you can empathize with others. You have to prioritize yourself. I would say it's good to prioritize your family, make sure you're in a strong position. Otherwise, you can't even help anyone else. So, I mean, there's a limit to it, obviously, and that should be respected. There should be an in-group preference to some extent. It's normal. It's functional. That's why it exists within humans. If empathy was universally good, then why would we still? Then everyone would be like that all the time. I mean, the alternative would have been weeded out of the gene pool. The fact that having an in-group preference that creates an out-group that you don't empathize with as much, the fact that that is how humans operate, is evidence that it's functional in some way. It survived and passed down evolutionarily.
Yeah, I don't know. It just seems like there is a tendency on the right to indeed do that, to indeed admit the fact that yeah, there are group differences and there's group affiliations, and there's nothing wrong with that, and also that you should really work on your immediate surroundings first. Don't try to change the world. Just like what's going on in your life, in your personal life, with your friends and family, and what's going on in your local, like around you.
Yeah.
Like
Well,
I agree with that viewpoint more. Just like
well, I
try
think
to
the right tend to be more accomplished people. Like they tend to be older, and the left tend to be young people who don't actually have experience with doing anything. They tend to be women, and I think these people, if I'm gonna just make a guess here, I think they just they think they're going around doing things, but they're not really, and they have like a form of magical thinking, where it's like, look, I've done this, I've helped this person feel better because I've been nice to them and I was pleasant and I'm doing something, and it's like they're
yeah.
not really doing shit. But they live in a sheltered society created by the more right wing people, and they just they're prone to magical thinking. They think they're doing more than they are. Like I mean,
It's
and
just the erroneous belief that if I'm nice and I compliment people, that I'm a good person. I don't agree with that. Like I've never
yeah,
agreed with that.
absolutely,
I've never seen that as a high level, like ever. But
yeah,
I think I understand where they're coming from, which I don't know what that says, but like maybe because it's like we can all understand where that impetus comes from, right? It's like obviously we feel good when we genuinely have complimented people and we genuinely see them highly, right? But it's wrong when it's just coming from a place where like you think that's the highest level.
yeah. It
It's
could,
like you falsely believe it. Like if I'm telling like the grocery clerk today that I think like they're doing a nice job and stuff, that somehow like puts me at the highest position. Like that's all I have to do. I just have to be nice to everyone around me. It's like
yeah,
that's not virtuous. It's really not virtuous. That's not a high level.
yep. I just got some Discord messages and I hope they didn't show up in the call, but whatever. Yeah, it doesn't matter too much. But yeah, being nice, it's like, yeah, of course, can relate to it. Um, like how does that? I mean, obviously you can relate to not wanting to make someone feel bad, right? Because you can say things to a person that will make them feel good, and you can say things to a person that will make them feel bad, right? Like if there's a fat person, for example, if you say they look good, they'll feel good, but then again, they'll feel good temporarily. They'll feel good short term, maybe. And if you say you have a weight problem and you really need to lose weight, no one finds it attractive, and you're unhealthy, and you're eating like a gluttonous pig, you need to stop. If you say that to them,
Yeah,
like it'll feel bad, and it'll like obviously you can understand why someone wouldn't want to say that to a person, because you don't want to make them feel bad. But then like it gets complicated because it might make them feel good long term. Sometimes and I think society in a way is just too pussy, and um, we're too averse to feeling bad. We've lost the sense that it's you should feel bad about certain things. Feeling bad certain things is a part of life, and it's a part of how you change things for the better. And I think society's just a bit pussy, and too many people have lived where they didn't have to. They were able to live a life in which they could avoid feeling bad about things because of how advanced our society is.
right.
But that isn't actually how you functionally do high level things. Feeling bad is actually a large part about achieving some kind of high level, and I think society is out of touch with that. I
And
think,
I'd like to add to that that I think that the people who really are accomplishing shit, like they don't feel the need to be complimented. They already know they're doing well. It's almost like the people who are being complimented, it's almost like there's this feeling that that person's more childlike and I need to help them out, right?
yeah,
The same way you'd help a child out. You'd compliment their drawing even if the drawing was shitty.
yeah,
In a weird way, it's like the people who are being complimented the most are being treated the most infantile because it's almost like the person who's complimenting on some subtle level knows that they're not as like mature in a way and that they need the compliments to feel good, even though like the compliments should be a result of doing something well, not just to boost your confidence. Even though, like you're saying, like what if you're really obese and like you shouldn't be complimented for your looks? Like if your eating habits are out of control, I mean, like
yeah.
that's nothing to be proud of. And
Well, it's
you'd only be mocking someone by telling them you look good in a way, ironically, right?
yeah. I think we've pathologized negative emotions to too high of an extent. I think it's a serious problem in our society, and we could go into psychology with that, like, but that's another huge fucking set of topics or topic. Like, I think in many ways modern psychology is on board with this over pathologizing of negative emotions. Like, there's actual genuine psychologists making it worse by agreeing that these people and their negative emotions, like that they have some obscure mental disorder, instead of acknowledging that negative emotions are a part of life and they have purpose. And I don't know, our society's just fucking weak. I don't know, maybe we fucking deserve this. I mean, obviously to some extent. I wouldn't say, I mean, the concept of whether or not something is deserved, I would say it's hard to argue that things aren't deserved, but we need to toughen up as a society. I don't know. I guess that's partially why we're doing this podcast. We want to encourage, like, going to certain places mentally. Like, we need to be more willing to go to certain places mentally as a society.
That's that's why I really like that Tyler Durden quote where he says self improvement is a form of masturbation, but self destruction on the other hand. Because you know what? Like a lot of the time, it's more difficult to destroy a part of yourself that's wrong than it is to add on to things that are like maybe not true, right? Um, like I really resonate with that quote. I just I feel like if you've been pursuing something your whole life and you've been going with the norm and the narrative, and then the moment you start questioning things, that's the moment that you start having to deal with the fundamental issue that you have to potentially destroy a part of yourself that was wrong, and not just it wasn't just because you were wrong. It's just that the narrative was wrong, and the ability to really be able to um, transcend that and actually adapt
Yeah.
is I don't know.
Well, I think
It's I swear that it's a really rare skill to have to
well,
be able to do that because when you've invested so much time and energy, it's like as humans we have this natural instinct to want to keep going along with
yeah.
what's
It,
essentially giving, like when you think about it, like we're in a situation where so many people have it really well, and it's just like why would you put yourself
well,
in a
yeah. I
situation
think
where you're depriving yourself of it
it's
even
self
though
perpetuating. Like, the more you do that, the more you are willing to scrap the parts of you that aren't. to be really radically self-honest with yourself and scrap the parts of you that are lacking. The more you do that, the easier it becomes to do, and the less you do that, the harder it becomes to do. Because if you go through your whole life and you've never done that, then you're
Yeah.
then it's like you're scrapping your entire self, and you have to admit that your whole fucking life was a waste in a way. Like it's a much more extreme thing. So it gets harder to do the less you do it, and easier to do the more you do it. Whereas if you did that your whole life and you're used to doing it, then you will actually have substance to you. And when you have to scrap something, it's like, okay, well, yeah, I can scrap this. It's a blow to my ego a little bit and my self-esteem and my opinion of myself, but I have all this other shit that are genuine, so I can scrap this one part, and it's not an overbearing. It's not an overwhelming thing.
But do you feel that we as a culture, like we especially have this proclivity to just believe that we're good and we're right and what we're doing is fine, and there's no need to reflect and to really, yeah, take the time to actually remove parts of yourself that are wrong.
Well, that's the thing. There is that. There's both. There is a tendency to do that. Like the left, I would say, is doing that. Is trying to do that to society. And actually, we might be onto something here. They might be projecting what they need to do to themselves onto society and onto the government and stuff. They might be projecting what they need to do to themselves, that form of self destruction, onto society as a whole, in a weird form of psychological projection. That might really be what's going on. Because those are the people specifically we know they're not doing that. They're all about accept me for who I am, accept me for being a homosexual even though I didn't accomplish anything, accept me for being a transgender person, accept me for being a fucking lesbian black woman or something. And they're not willing to scrap things about themselves, and then they're the same people who we know don't, and the fat shaming people, they're all leftists, right? The people who are against fat shaming. And then these same people who clearly have a reluctance to critically look at themselves are, I would say, hypercritical of Western civilization, which is an interesting phenomenon. And I mean, I think there's probably something there that we could understand more. Or someone in the
Mm-hmm.
fucking comments could think about that. Like, yeah, I mean, I think there's something there, basically, and I think we're onto something. We
Right,
have,
because if it's too painful for you to look inward into yourself, it's always easier to just look at the external world and just say, "This is the problem. I found the problem. Um, it's that over there, right?"
well, yeah, well, the concept, the phenomenon of psychological projection is, it's pretty complicated. But it's definitely a thing that happens. I don't know exactly how it happens, or like what is going on. I would have to think more about it to to claim to understand it. I don't really understand it that well, but I have noticed that it happens. So I do believe it's a genuine thing that happens, and it looks like that might be what's going on. I'd have to take some time to analyze it to understand it more. I don't really understand exactly the mechanisms for how psychological projection works, but it does seem like it's a legitimate thing that happens. I mean, it does seem like it's happening with those people with that self destruction you're talking about. It's like on some
Well,
level
I don't
they
know. I'm also thinking about Hitler, and he had this quote where he said that if if Germany doesn't win, then I'd rather it all go in flames or something like that. It just made me think that, like, I don't know. That seems really pathological. Like it's like either I want everything or I can't have anything at all, and I'd rather destroy everything. And he also wanted to set like Paris on fire, but like one of his generals chose not to, and that's why we have Paris the way it is now. Even though, well, I mean, they could have rebuilt it. They rebuilt a lot of cities after World War II. I don't know.
damn.
Yeah, but
Yeah, I didn't know that was his position. I don't know why that would be. Maybe he. I mean, I guess that might be because
he
of.
was obviously extremely humiliated by the defeat. Like he knew he was defeated, and I feel like he probably had issues with confronting his mortality, right? And so I don't know.
Well, I would say
But then
he.
again, he was also on drugs. He also had
Yeah.
like allegedly he had like symptoms of Alzheimer's, and he wasn't thinking straight. And who knows?
Well, apparently he
It's
was.
possible
Apparently
that
he also had a heart condition, and he was gonna die. Like he didn't have much longer to live.
Yeah.
So he might have thought, I mean, if he's gonna die, it would make sense that he'd care less about the outside world. But I think that might also be because of just the conditions in Germany that led to the Nazis in the first place. Like they were being humiliated. Obviously, they could not stand living in the Germany that existed before World War II. They saw it as humiliation. They could not stand living in that Germany. So maybe he hated that Germany so much that he'd rather there be no Germany than that one again. Which I don't know. I don't know. It depends exactly what he meant, right? It depends exactly what he meant.
It's just one of those quotes that I like that I've read somewhere, and I can't even verify it, but I do remember hearing it or seeing it.
I mean, to be honest with you, I would rather the United States break apart than see it be run by Joe Biden. So I can relate in that sense. I'd rather there be no United States and that they break apart. I mean, I don't want it to all get destroyed. Like that's completely against what I'm saying. Completely different than what I'm saying. But I think I'd rather see it split apart than see it run by Joe Biden. I think honestly, if I'm being honest, I would. I mean, I'm not trying to threaten anything. I'm not trying to advocate. I'm not trying to tell people to fucking start a separation movement. But which I mean, there shouldn't be anything wrong with that anyway. Like whether where certain places being part of a certain country should be up to the people of that territory, and they should be able to vote on it. Just like in Quebec, they had a referendum. In Scotland, they had a referendum to be part of the UK. That's how it should be everywhere, right? I mean, that makes sense. And I would rather the United States break apart as a country and split into the left and right than see the United States run by these leftists. I hate them.
Yeah, but the thing is though that it's like what it is. It's more of a rural versus like urban issue, isn't it?
Yeah,
More so than even state.
yeah.
Like
So
so, it's a weird situation where it's like
why? What do you
there's
mean?
people in densely packed cities, and then there's the country, which is just enormous.
Yeah, and the country should
Um,
split off, and we'll see how
the
well those.
countryside, I mean.
Yeah, yeah, and we'll see how well those city people do without the farms. We'll see how well they do. That's what should happen. And they've been arrogant and psychopathic towards the fucking. And that's another thing. We talked about empathy. We didn't even talk about psychopathy, which we probably should have. But like, what causes psychopathy? It's like if someone's being psychopathic towards you, you're gonna return the favor. You can't be empathetic towards someone who's directly being hostile and psychopathic towards you. I mean, that's what people are doing to white people. So, I mean, I'm completely in favor of those rural right wing parts of the U.S. splitting off and separating from those cities, and we can see how well those cities. We'll see how well those cities will do. They don't deserve anything more than that. You can't say it wouldn't be deserved for them to be split off from the farms and then for the right wing part of the country to just not agree to trade with them and then let them find another way to feed themselves and see what happens. I'm in favor of that. I think I feel bad for the people in the cities who are right wing though. That would suck. But I don't know. I can relate to wanting to seeing to wanting to being so against a certain form of governance in a country to rather see it broken apart than to see a certain form of governance. For sure, I can relate to that. I don't know what Hitler meant though. Like maybe he was genuinely down to completely destroy the whole country, which seems a little bit at odds with his other views. He just wants to destroy his own people. But then again, a lot of Germanic people and Celts and shit were like that with the Romans. Like they would wipe themselves out, kill themselves before they allowed themselves to be subjugated. That does too. That's a pretty common thing in humans, like the whole freedom or death thing. Like the Greeks were like that. I'm sure a lot of ancient tribes were like that. It's a popular slogan to this day.
Yeah. But regarding the split in politics, like I don't know, I'm just thinking about people living in like urban places, and it's like what should they like what would be a sign of being more respectful towards the other side then? Because if you are living in a city, you're less likely to own a firearm. You're more likely to rely on the local police to solve criminal situations,
What do you
and
mean?
you're more likely to support like social programs.
You're more likely to
because
hate white people and treat white people like shit and have views that are directly hostile towards white people. Sorry, what was your question? What would be a sign of more respect? You said
yeah,
like what do you mean? Like they'd have to be showing more respect and stop being hostile towards white people and stop openly pushing for our countries to be given away to foreigners against our will. That would be an important sign of respect, and they're not doing that.
because like what if they don't care about that and they just care
Well, I
more
mean
about the
that's disrespectful to not care about that. So we shouldn't care about them. Like when I say what I just said, any most leftists would just like completely ridicule it and scoff at it and not care at all, and that's disrespectful. White people aren't being respected at all. We're really being disrespected, and so yeah, why would we want to live with these people? We didn't even consent to the immigration in the first place. Arguably, like, it's a whole other topic whether immigration is consensual.
I guess I'm saying like why isn't there just a left wing party that's anti immigration then?
What do you mean?
Like, because if you're going to live in a city, I guess you're going to hypothetically need social programs under the current paradigm. And, but they could also be anti immigration. Like, they're not at odds with each other.
Yeah, well, why are they not anti-immigration? I think because they want the United States to become less white. A lot of them, maybe some of them see some economic reason for it, but there's both.
Yeah, I don't know, because it's not like the two have to be converging. There's no reason for it. I don't know. Because there's definitely different dimensions to political positions, right? Like, there is the pure economic, like you're saying, but there's also social and there's cultural.
Yeah, and I would say the anti-white shit is very widespread, and it's at the heart of a
No,
lot
but
of
there
countries.
definitely is a tendency towards people who want like greater government control and wanting increased immigration. Like there definitely seems to be a trend there.
Yeah, and you're saying it doesn't necessarily make sense.
Yeah, like because traditionally the left was about protecting workers and protecting worker rights.
Yeah.
And it's just all of a sudden they flipped the narrative and now they're all about immigration. It's just
Well,
like, well, what about the workers whose
Well,
jobs are being
I could
taken
see a
away?
connection. I mean, maybe the reason they're so in favor of social programs is because they recognize that they would benefit non-white people, and immigration and is also something that is like that would benefit non-white people if you make the country more non-white, and maybe that's their underlying desire, their underlying.
So their desire wasn't even to help workers
It
in the
was to
first place.
help.
You're
It's
saying,
to help. No, I'm not saying. I'm not talking about the older left. I'm saying now
oh,
because they're
okay,
not necessarily even the same people. I'm saying now
yeah.
the current left, like the underlying desire that is at the heart of both their pro-immigration policies and their pro-social program policies is that they have not a bias against white people or for non-white people. That might be the case. I don't know.
So that's fully like what you're seeing they're implementing, right?
What do you mean? What I'm seeing there? Yeah, that's definitely the case that there's a pattern of leftists being pro social programs and pro immigration for sure.
Because they see themselves as being like moral crusaders in that respect, right? Where it's just like I'm helping I'm helping people who are not doing well.
Yeah, and there's a racial
Like we have a
side.
moral obligation to help people because there's such an economic disparity, right?
Yeah, and I also think that a lot of the disparities are because of racial oppression, and I don't know. There's a lot of other That's a whole other topic we could cover. There's a lot of other topics. Did we commit? I don't know if we committed to a topic for the next episode in the last podcast. Did we said empathy? We talked about empathy on this one. Did we say another topic for the one after?
No, I think what happened was we mentioned a bunch of topics that we were going to cover, but I don't think we had a specific like sequence.
I swear we talked about empathy this one, and then there was another subject for the one after.
Really?
I don't remember if that was on the podcast or we talked about that randomly some other time.
Because I know that there were topics that we showed an interest in the previous podcast, but I don't know if we had like a commitment to like doing it at this time, like after this podcast or whatever.
Yeah, actually, true. I don't even remember if we committed to covering empathy. We might have said that after it stopped recording, because it stopped recording and we continued to talk for a while, and so it might have even been after that. It might not even be on the podcast. And
Oh yeah,
these
did we
people
even
might be.
mention the fact that the previous attempt didn't work?
Yeah, I said that at the beginning, I think.
Oh right.
But yeah, these people might be like, "What the fuck's he talking about?" They never said they were gonna do cover empathy. Well, I say these people, but it's like the one or two people who listened. Probably none of them who listened to the whole thing.
Yeah, for sure not. Even though I don't know who knows what could happen, but I
But
thought it
yeah,
was a pretty good conversation right now.
yeah, we try to cover. Yeah, I mean, yeah. To sum up, basically, yeah, this is where we want to have open dialogue, discuss what anything, no limits. Like just openly try to analyze whatever. Genuinely, we want to engage with the comments. Maybe so far it's been a little bit hostile, which is fine. Which is fine. We're down for that too. But yeah, any type of comments, any type of discussion, we're genuinely down to discuss everything. Any comment we'll respond to, every single one. And yeah, he'd like we might even be down to like just bring random people on, like if they want to join the call at some point. Like we can just have them on the podcast. Who knows what'll happen? Probably be down for that in the future. But just yeah, any kind of engagement, any kind of question, we'll try to talk about it.
Maybe if someone has like a suggestion too, like we'd be like willing to do it. I don't know.
Yeah. Any
Like if there's a topic that
for sure. The comment can just
someone
be
or a bunch of people wanted to covered for whatever reason.
yeah. If anyone wants us to cover anything, just let us know. We'll respond to everything. That's yeah. Because we genuinely want dialogue, and I don't like there isn't that much dialogue between different people on the internet anymore. There used to be video responses on YouTube, and I remember those days, and it was better. I thought there was genuinely more intellectualism. So I'm down to increase that, and like yeah, we just make connections, like have just genuinely get some intellectual YouTube shit going, and BitChute too or whatever. We're on BitChute and YouTube. Respond to anyone, and we'll say your name too. Like if you want some clout, we'll say your name when we read your comments. So if you want, no, it's not. I mean, that's not really that much of an appeal since we don't have that many viewers. But whatever. Obviously, know the situation. We're trying to spread the podcast and get it going more. So yeah, like consider it's like free super chats basically. It's like super chats, but you don't have to pay because we recognize we're a small podcast that we're trying to grow. So like yeah, I mean we're not expecting people to pay us to like they do with super chats and popular podcasts. So think of this podcast as like a podcast you can comment on and we'll actually respond like as if it's a super chat, but you don't have to fucking pay for the super chat. Just we'll treat every comment as if it is. All right. Well, I'm down to end it there. I don't know how long both of these will be. Like the first part that cut out combined with this, probably quite a lot.
Yeah, we've been talking a while.
Yep. But whatever. I don't think there's a limit to how long the videos can be, so it should be fine.
Yeah, because it's like it really isn't about the duration. It's more like what are we talking about, right? Like is it is it actually important? Is it enlightening? Does it does it serve its purpose?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think we both were engaged in the conversation. Like it wasn't dull to us, so I mean that's might not be dull. I don't know. I don't know how it would be to someone else. Like if someone has similar interests to us, they might have enjoyed it. I don't know. But I think we're
It's
rambling.
entirely possible
I think
that
at
like
this
most
point
people would just be dismissive of it,
I think we're
but
at this point we're kind of rambling on. I'm down to end
yeah.
it. I'm down to end it here. Just yeah, comment whatever. We'll respond to it next podcast. Yeah, my coffee buzz has worn off. I'm down to just end it. So, farewell, listeners. If anyone made it this far, hell yeah, farewell.